Welcome back, Richard. It's good to see you on our regularly scheduled recording morning.
Back to our regular day, and today is significant.
Yes.
Today is significant because today is the fall equinox, autumn equinox. So for those of you who are at the edge of your seat, there's an equal number of daylight and dark hours today. Same number of hours. And from now till December 21st, the day's daylight will become shorter and shorter and shorter.
Yeah.
Today it's equal, the autumn equinox.
Yeah. And hopefully the things will continue to be a little bit cooler here. The evenings have gotten a little bit cooler here. So that's been
Did you notice it this morning? That
I did.
not as much humidity. I stepped out and it's the first day that I thought, wow, the humidity is leaving, hopefully.
Right.
Warm, but not humid.
And now here's the transition from that to our topic for the day is with the cooler weather comes the holidays.
Oh,
and with the holidays comes anxiety, comes stress. And so today we're going to talk about anxiety and talk about really the significance of anxiety today. We're living in a world right now where there's stress from all over the place, just about anywhere you look, and that stress for many people is leading to anxiety.
Yeah, I don't know whether it's nationwide people are feeling anxiety, but we certainly are in Florida, especially during hurricane season and many changes and rapid growth and population growth, and so in Florida we're feeling it. I'm not sure that the rest of the country is feeling it as acutely as we are, but anxiety is on the rise. It seems to be increasing. And so we're going to talk about it today. And there's a great article that appeared just out of nowhere about what's fueling 6 common habits that is fueling our anxiety. And in the article, she makes 2 points. Point 1 is that anxiety is sort of our body's smoke alarm. And we've kind of touched on this issue before, that anxiety tells us something is wrong. And like a smoke alarm in your house, the smoke alarm doesn't think, it doesn't do anything. It just says, hey folks, something is wrong. You may want to check it out. Okay. It's up to us to check it out. And I think that's a good thing to keep in mind as any person struggles with anxiety. Remember that anxiety is just your smoke alarm. It tells you that something is amiss. Take a closer look at it and see if you need to do anything. Is there a fire in the house, or did you burn your toast? And
right.
That's what you need to figure out.
Absolutely. And I think it's such a, as you said, we've talked about this before, and, so many of the things that that can lead to mental health conditions or mental illness, such as anxiety, it begins so often with just a message from our body that something is wrong. Whether you're thinking about depression or you're thinking about anxiety or you're thinking about lots of other things, the idea is that your body is trying to communicate something to you, and depending on how you handle that message, it's either going to lead to some resolution where you're going to manage whatever the conflict or issue is, or it could lead to mental health problems because you're avoiding those issues or you're making those issues worse in some way, and it's leading to some mental health problems. And we're going to get into that into the second point that she makes in the article. But it's so important that we begin with that so many things begin with it's just a message from our body that we need to pay attention to.
A couple of weeks ago, we did a podcast about what to do about things, and not just to rely on symptoms, and just to say, well, I have these symptoms, so I must be depressed, or I'm a little bit anxious, so let's do deep breathing. And once again, I think we want to reiterate that point, that if your body's telling you you're anxious, don't just deal with the anxiety. Don't just say, okay, what do I need to do to relax? Because it's like taking an aspirin. Yeah, you can take an aspirin for a headache, but it might be more serious than that. So if you're having chronic headaches, then you may want to see a specialist. Okay, it's the same with this. Don't just reach for a quick fix. There's a lot of information coming out about benzodiazepines today. And frequently people will feel anxious, so they'll pop a benzodiazepine, take a Valium or take some kind of medication, cause their anxiety, but doesn't solve the problem.
Right.
So once again, are the curtains ablaze or did you burn your toast? And that's what we're going to talk about today, is that let's take one step further and say, what is the smoke alarm trying to tell me and what should I do about it?
Right, absolutely. And so the second point that she makes within the article is she's talking about these 6 things that that's happening today that many people are doing that is really fueling and stoking the anxiety that we're experiencing. And the first thing that she talks about is black and white thinking. And I think that it's great that this is number 1 on the list, because my goodness, it is so true that people, many people now have a tendency of it's all or nothing. Either I'm a tremendous success or I'm a lousy failure, and there is nothing in between. And it's leading to so many people experiencing significant stress and anxiety because they just they can't see any variations in between.
Right. This, I think, don't you think this is particularly applicable to young people, teenagers, for example?
Absolutely.
It's that they'll fail a test, and Bernie, how many times have you dealt with that? Well, I failed my math test, so I'm not good at math.
Right.
Okay. And I should stop no, you failed a math test, figure out why. It doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter whether you failed a quiz or you missed a sale or you burned a dinner that you were making. All that means is that you're human and you make mistakes and sometimes you fall short. It doesn't mean you're a failure.
Right.
Somebody said you don't fail until you quit.
Right.
As long as you're doing something, you're not a failure. So this idea that a simple failure means that you are a failure. No, your failures are setbacks there, and you learn from those failures. They don't define who you are.
Absolutely, because we talked to a student who failed a test, and they say, I'm not good at math. I failed this test. I'm not good at math. Right. And you talk to them for a few minutes, and you find out, well, something happened at the home last night, and they were up all night, and so they were sleep deprived, and so they were falling asleep during the math. Well, okay, so that has nothing to do with math. That has to do with, you were tired. So. Right. Yeah, definitely the black and white thinking is an issue. The second thing she mentions is avoidance.
Right.
And again, this is something that I think that I probably say the most often to patients who are experiencing anxiety is that the more that you avoid the issue that's making you anxious, the more that you avoid it, the more anxious you're going to become.
That's right. It fuels your anxiety.
Right. It's very paradoxical that. And anxiety is cruel in that way, that the thing that seems to relieve anxiety the most, avoiding the thing that makes you anxious, is actually the thing that's going to make that anxiety worse and less tolerable in the future.
Right. When people come in and they say they're anxious and they're not sleeping, and you have to walk them through these things, because frequently, if you're that anxious that you're not sleeping, you have to look at these 6 things, and we're going to talk about 6 different reasons people that fuel our anxiety. You have to sit down and figure out, what are you doing? I have a thing in my life right now, doesn't matter what it is, I'm avoiding it. I mean, I'm guilty of number 2. Okay, I just don't want to deal with that right now. And but it's absolutely true. The more I avoid it, the more anxious I'm becoming about it.
Right. The more you avoid it, the more anxious you become about it, which means that the more you're going to avoid it. It just is a cycle.
Right. So you have to think about this. Is what are you thinking about? What's going on? And let's try to identify that and deal with that, rather than popping a pill or doing deep breathing or some other strategy. Yeah, your anxiety is relieved, but if you haven't paid your credit card bill, the anxiety is still going to be there. It's going to keep coming up.
Absolutely. Now, the third thing on her list, I think that you need to hear and that is seeking reassurance.
Right.
And, on the surface, and even with the things that you just mentioned, taking deep breaths and things like that, these things are things that can definitely help. They can relieve your anxiety. They can make it better. But the problem is if we're not careful, we become dependent on them. If the only way that you can, resolve an issue, the only way that you can, take some of the steps that you need to take to solve some problems in your life is if somebody else is there to provide reassurance and support,
Right.
and root you on. Well, what that means is now you're dependent on that person. And if that person's not there, then you're not going to be able to do it. You're not really dealing with the anxiety. You're treating the anxiety, which again, on a case-by-case situation or in particular situations, that may be fine. But to use it or rely on it is really a kind of a slippery slope when it comes to your ability to manage and deal with these things on your own.
Right. The trap that you get into with this seeking reassurance is that you're trying to make a decision about house renovation. How many people do you have to check with?
Right.
I've checked with 3 people and 2 said this and 1 said this. Should I get a 4th opinion or a 5th opinion? How many opinions are enough? Okay.
Right.
And if you can't decide what you want, if you don't know what you want, I mean, that's what you have to do is you have to figure out, what do I want? And I'm happy, I'm comfortable, I'm confident that I'm making the right decision for me. Otherwise, how many opinions are you going to get before you're satisfied? And you have to check before you can make a decision. So again, if you're not sure, if you don't have enough opinions, then you're going to go into avoiding. You're not going to do anything. And so the two are related. But how much reassurance is enough? And theoretically, you'll never get enough opinions.
Right. Right. Yeah, it'll just continue. So
Mm-hmm.
the fourth point that she makes, again, is another really good one that we often talk to patients about, and that is catastrophizing. Right. So this is a situation where you're dreading or you're really anxious about an upcoming scenario or situation or circumstance, and all that you think about is the worst case scenario.
Right.
You're overestimating the dread or the potential negatives of it, and you're completely underestimating your ability to manage it or anything positive that could come from it.
That's right.
And so you're creating a catastrophe. You're catastrophizing this scenario to the point that, again, it's making it. We can go back to avoiding, or we can go back to the need for reassurance. It's really pushing you back into some of those other pitfalls, because all you're thinking about is the worst case scenario.
Right. Mm-hmm. And this is really common. I mean, people do this routinely, is they go right to the worst case, and you want to back up and say, wait a minute, what is the worst thing that can happen? And typically, if you walk somebody through this, they'll say to you, well, this, I would get fired. And then what do you do?
Mm-hmm.
Well, then I have to get another job. Right. So even if you get to worst case, you can manage worst case. Right. So it's not just that, and you're right, it's not just that you're overestimating the damage, you're underestimating your ability to deal with it. So most of us are going to deal with whatever we get. You have the capacity.
Right. And the example that you use is terrific, because, what I find myself talking to the patients about who make those kind of statements is, so what's the worst thing that could happen? Well, I could get fired. Well, you don't really like that job either way. Anyway, do you? Because, if you really like your job, you probably wouldn't be stressed out about it so much like this. And so, all right, so let's think about how we're going to deal with that. And, again, we get to problem solving as opposed to catastrophizing. So,
one of my kids ran into something like that a short time ago. And I said, life throws you this stuff. But I said, we've all experienced it, but maybe this is not the job for you. I mean, you talk about all these bad things. Maybe what your smoke alarm is telling you is that maybe it's time for a change. Maybe this is a good thing.
Right. Absolutely. Now, the fifth thing mentioned in the article is negative self-talk.
Right.
Okay. Very common thing that happens. And really, as this sounds, it's just our tendency to be much more critical, much harsher with ourselves than we would be with anyone else. How many times do we say things to ourselves that we would never say to or about somebody else.
Mhm.
You know,
Exactly.
we are so self-critical, so much negative self-talk that again, it just contributes to and feeds that anxiety.
Right. Yeah. Most of us are going to be harder on ourselves than we are on anybody else. Okay. And you need to remember that when you get into these situations, when you're feeling anxious, remember, you're probably being harsher than you need to be, because you wouldn't do this with anybody else.
Absolutely. Now, the last thing that's mentioned is people pleasing. And,
Mhm.
you know, we see this so often, surprisingly, I think we see this a lot with teenagers, you know, where they're so concerned about what their peers think or say, or how it's going to look to other people, you know, adults and parents and all, they experience this as well. But we especially see this in teenagers where they are so concerned because teenagers go through this phase where they sort of imagine themselves on stage, right?
Yeah.
And everybody in the world is looking at them, even though
Yeah.
nobody
Yeah.
is, you know,
Right. The
they imagine
imaginary.
that everybody is looking at them. And so
Right.
they are so concerned about how it's going to appear to others that they overthink and overestimate and under predict. And they do all of these things that we're talking about, all for the sake of pleasing other people.
Right. You know, you mentioned the holidays earlier. The holidays are coming. And when I think of the holidays, I think of a space shuttle hurtling back to Earth in flames, you know, because that's what it feels like, you know, like we're hurtling in flames toward the holidays. But throughout the holidays, you're going to feel pressure to do things that you don't want to do. You don't really want to do it, but you're doing it to make other people happy. Okay.
Right.
Certain amount of that is good. But if your anxiety is produced because you're trying to make other people happy, you need to step back and give that a little bit. You got to think about that a little bit.
Right. Yeah. So just to reiterate that, because that's a really important point. If your self-worth depends on other people, if your self-esteem, how you view yourself, how you know, estimate your abilities is dependent upon what other people say or do,
Mhm.
and that's a concern. And you need some to work with someone to help build those skills so that you can be self-reliant. You can depend on yourself for that reassurance and that confidence,
Yeah.
and being dependent
Right.
on other people.
Mhm. Yeah. If you have to take medication to get through the holidays, maybe it's time to rethink the holidays. Maybe rethink your approach to the holidays and what's really going on underneath it all.
Right.
Right.
Absolutely. So with these things that we tend to do, and again, these, as this author suggests, you know, these are tendencies that are certainly on the rise. More and more people are doing these things. You know, let's think about some things that we can do to deal with it, to help alleviate some of this anxiety. And the first thing that's mentioned is, you know, grounding. Uh,
Right.
you know, you mentioned taking deep breaths earlier. There are strategies that we can do to help relax and to calm some of our anxiety
Right.
that are very beneficial. Now, you do those things, you calm the anxiety, and then you deal with it.
Right.
You don't use these strategies to calm the anxiety and then continue to avoid. That's not
Right.
going to
Right.
help anything.
Right.
But you engage in some of these things again, like deep breathing, going for a walk, mindfulness strategies that we've talked about in previous podcasts. You use these strategies to calm the anxiety so that you can then address the issue.
That's right. Oh, that's right. And it's like what we said about medication a few weeks ago. You take medication to reduce symptoms so that you can do the work.
Right.
This is the same thing. You use these strategies so that you can do the work. You don't use the strategies, maintain the maladaptive thinking. You know, okay, I'm going to do deep breathing, but I'm going to keep avoiding my credit card bill. Okay. That's not how this works. You reduce the anxiety so that you can do the work that you have to do.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
The second thing to consider is getting professional help. You know, those common strategies that we just mentioned are great for many people, probably most people. But
Right.
there are those who are going to need some additional help, and that help may be to get medication, as you suggested, but it also may be just to find other strategies or to work through other issues that are sort of at the root of some of these issues. And it could be issues from the past. It could be things that are ongoing in your life that you're not really fully aware of that's contributing to the anxiety. But seeking professional help is somebody's going to help you find strategies and help you find ways to cope with these issues.
Right. And finally, maybe anxiety is a secondary emotion. Maybe that's not one of the things we're beginning to understand with ADHD is that ADHD usually is a cluster that includes ADHD, anxiety, and depression. And typically a person could have all three. Maybe your anxiety is really really secondary to some other emotion or some other feeling or some other thing that's going on in your life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, there are many other things that you can do to help address these issues. You can, we've talked before about being active, exercising. A minute ago, we mentioned going for a walk. Lots of times when we are physically active, if you think about anxiety as energy, right. Getting out and burning energy, utilizing some of that energy can help. It can help alleviate some of that stress.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It was interesting that just about the time that we were putting this together, another article appeared out of the blue that has a whole list of things you could do to reduce anxiety. And when we looked into that, lo and behold, what did we find? And most of them are about exercise, the food and beverages, things that you're eating and drinking, and so nutrition, exercise, and sleep. Right. If you tend to be anxious, you always, and we've said this many, many times, whether it's depression, anxiety, no matter what you're dealing with, make sure that you're eating, sleeping, and exercising, because you're going to have to maintain those good life habits in order to reduce anxiety. Okay. Right. So many of these, and the first one they put up there is be active. Okay. You have to stay active. You have to get rid of this energy and anxiety. And the more you exercise, the better you're going to feel.
Absolutely. And I've talked before about, there was a patient that I saw some time ago, and, he came in because he was struggling with anxiety, and he talked about, as we worked through it, it ends up where, for some reason, anytime he was getting in his truck, now he wasn't anxious about driving, but when he would get in his truck, he would feel this anxiety as he's driving. It would just significantly increase. It wasn't related to traffic. It wasn't related to anything. But we whittled it down to anytime he got in his truck, he had basically a cup of caffeine, whether it was coffee or some soda, and he was smoking cigarettes, which is another stimulant. And nicotine can be another stimulant. And so we cut those two things out, and his anxiety significantly decreased enough to where he was able to manage it. So, limiting alcohol and caffeine, making sure that you're eating a good diet, and that includes beverages that you're drinking and things like that. If you're managing those things, it's going to have some effect on your anxiety.
Right. That's right. And so you have these three things: nutrition, exercise, and sleep. You have to address those. People will say, well, I don't know why I'm so anxious. And you talk about their sleep and they say, well, no, I don't sleep very much. Well, why not? Well, I'm kind of watching movies on my computer, and, if you're not sleeping well, it's going to make everything worse. So you have nutrition, sleep, exercise, and then self-care, meditation. We talked about grounding techniques, moving to a different place, breathing exercises, which just introduce more oxygen into your system. So you can do these things all on your own, or you can move toward, you can get help from others. Right. And that kind of falls into three categories. There are lots of professional treatments you can use, different forms of psychotherapy. Cognitive behavioral therapy is the one that we talk about most often, but there are many other kinds of things. Something called ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, which is also becoming more common. And then, of course, finally, medication. You may need to take some medication, and once again, to reduce the symptoms enough that allow you to do the work that you have to do, to think through this thing. What am I doing? Am I avoiding? Am I catastrophizing? You need a clear head to do that. And if you're overwhelmed by your emotions, maybe it's time to take a little bit of medication, reduce the symptoms, then you can deal with the underlying problem.
Absolutely. Now, so you may be saying to yourself, yeah, I have some of these things and I'm trying to work through them, But we were talking about maybe seeing a professional. So when do I need to see a professional? This really goes back to, again, what we've talked about many times before on the podcast, and that is anytime your functioning is getting influenced.
Right.
If you can't control your anxiety, if you're having difficulty functioning, having difficulty getting your work done, meeting obligations, if you're not sleeping, you're having poor appetite, your diet is really off, and you just can't seem to get it back. Physical symptoms, any of these things that are really affecting you physiologically or affecting you functionally, these are good cues to maybe talk to a professional and get some additional help.
Right. If you find yourself really angry, you're lashing out at people, you're not sleeping well, you're not paying attention at work, you find yourself being short-tempered, or you're just moody and irritable, these are all signs that maybe it's time to seek some professional help just to sort it out. You're going to have to sort all this stuff out. And sometimes talking to another person will help you sort out and get to the root cause where you want to go. You want to get to the cause of whatever's behind this. So talking to somebody else helps you to clarify your thinking so that you can deal with it.
Absolutely. All right. So I think that's it for today.
Yeah.
Definitely, examine, do some self-reflection, examine what's going on within your body. Especially if you're experiencing some anxiety, there's plenty happening in the world today that can cause anxiety and really foster it and keep it going. We have the start of school. We have, our political situations are very anxiety producing. And just the state of the world today can be anxiety producing. So,
but I like your first comment about the holidays are coming.
Yeah.
That's always a very, very stressful time of year. So as you, like you say, the start of school, the holidays, we have a presidential election, all this stuff is going to affect you. And so be aware and be mindful, but don't just treat the symptoms. Okay. Make sure you're looking at the root cause.
Absolutely. And it's funny that we mentioned the presidential election, which is still over a year away.
Still a year away.
Yeah. But we're still going to be dealing with that. So
right.
Yes, use some of these strategies and just, do that self-reflection and be mindful of it. So, all right. Until next time, stay happy, stay healthy, and forget to be afraid.